The coffee pot slipped from my trembling hands and shattered against the marble floor of my son's penthouse kitchen. Brandon's voice cut through the sound of breaking glass like a blade. "Jesus, Dad, can't you do anything right? That's the second thing you've broken this month." I stood there among the shards and spreading coffee, my 70-year-old knees protesting as I bent to clean up the mess. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Seattle's skyline gleamed in the morning sun, a view that cost my son $12,000 a month. A view he believed he'd earned entirely on his own. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Vanessa appeared in the doorway wearing a silk robe that probably cost more than my monthly rent. She wrinkled her nose at the scene. "Walter, we have important guests coming tonight. Can you please try to be more careful? The caterers will be here at 6, and I need you to help them set up." She said it the way you'd speak to a child or a particularly slow employee. I nodded silently, reaching for the paper towels while my son returned to his laptop at the dining table, already dismissing my existence. This was my life now. 5 days a week, I took the bus from my small apartment in Wallingford to this glass tower in Belltown, where I cooked meals, cleaned bathrooms, and ran errands for my son and his wife. They paid me nothing. When I'd moved to the modest one-bedroom after Margaret died, Brandon had suggested I help out around the house to stay active. "It'll be good for you, Dad. Give you purpose." What he meant was free labor while he and Vanessa lived like royalty. I swept up the broken ceramic, each piece feeling like a fragment of my dignity. Brandon had his conference call in 30 minutes with the board. I'd heard him practicing his presentation last night, full of confidence about the new direction he was taking Morrison Tech Solutions. My company. The company I'd built from nothing in a garage 35 years ago. The company that still bore my name, though my son had convinced himself he was the architect of its success. The morning Margaret died, she'd gripped my hand with surprising strength for someone so frail. The cancer had taken everything except her sharp mind. "Promise me you won't let him take advantage of you," she'd whispered. "Brandon thinks the world owes him everything because he's charming. Don't give him so much that he forgets you're his father, not his servant." I'd promised, but watching her fade had broken something fundamental in me. When she passed, I'd retreated into myself, accepted Brandon's suggestion to downsize, to simplify, to let him handle the complicated business matters. Grief had made me compliant. I finished cleaning the coffee and started preparing their breakfast. Egg white omelets for both, no cheese for Vanessa, extra vegetables for Brandon. I knew their orders better than any restaurant server. While the eggs cooked, I could hear Brandon on his call with someone from the office. "No, I don't care what the old protocols were. We're implementing the new system next quarter. My father built this company on outdated principles. It's time for modern leadership. My father built this company on outdated principles." The words landed like physical blows. I stood at the stove, spatula in hand, thinking about the nights I'd worked until dawn writing code, the years Margaret and I had survived on ramen and hope, the clients I'd won through persistence and integrity. Outdated principles. I plated their breakfast with hands that had suddenly stopped shaking. Something cold was crystallizing in my chest, replacing the warm compliance I'd carried since Margaret's death. I set Brandon's omelet in front of him without a word. He didn't look up from his laptop. "Thanks. Oh, and Dad, can you pick up my dry cleaning today? I need the Navy suit for tomorrow's investor meeting." "Of course," I said quietly. "Anything else?" Vanessa breezed in, now dressed in workout clothes that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. "Walter, after you finish the dry cleaning, could you stop by Whole Foods? I'm making a list." She handed me her phone showing a notes app with at least 30 items. "And we need the guest bathroom deep cleaned before tonight. Brandon's boss is coming." Brandon's boss. I almost laughed. Marcus Chen was the current CEO, a position I created when I'd restructured the company 5 years ago. A position that reported directly to the board of directors. A board I still controlled through my majority ownership, though neither Brandon nor Vanessa knew that detail. After they left for their respective days, Brandon to my office building and Vanessa to her Pilates class, I stood alone in their penthouse. The morning light streamed through those expensive windows, illuminating a space filled with furniture and art that my company's success had purchased. I walked slowly through the rooms, seeing them clearly for perhaps the first time in months. In Brandon's home office, I found stacks of documents from Morrison Tech Solutions. Quarterly reports, strategic plans, budgets. I picked up a folder labeled Succession Planning and opened it. Inside was a detailed proposal for Brandon's transition to CEO, including a timeline for phasing out legacy leadership influences and restructuring the board composition. My name appeared only once, in a footnote about managing the founder's emeritus status. I sat down in Brandon's leather chair, the expensive kind with lumbar support and ergonomic design. The kind I'd never bought for myself because I believed in reinvesting profits into the business and taking care of employees first. My son had no such reservations about executive comfort. The documents painted a clear picture. Brandon was positioning himself to take complete control of Morrison Tech Solutions. He'd been cultivating board relationships, proposing changes that would diminish the founder's voting rights, and planning to restructure the ownership distribution. He assumed that because I'd stepped back, because I seemed content in my small apartment and my role as his unpaid domestic help, that I'd simply sign whatever papers he eventually put in front of me. He assumed I was too old, too grief-stricken, too grateful for his attention to understand what he was doing. He thought I'd become the doddering old man who broke coffee pots and needed purpose through menial tasks. My son had mistaken my grief for incompetence, my kindness for weakness. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to a contact I hadn't called in months. Richard Chen, my corporate attorney and the younger brother of Marcus, the CEO. Richard had handled the complex trust structure I'd established when Margaret got sick, the legal framework that protected my ownership while allowing me to step back from daily operations. The framework my son knew nothing about because he'd been too busy climbing the corporate ladder to ask questions about the actual ownership structure. The phone rang twice before Richard's familiar voice answered. "Walter, it's been too long. How are you holding up?" I looked around Brandon's office, at the succession plans and restructuring proposals, at the evidence of my son's assumption that I was a harmless old man to be managed and eventually discarded. "Richard, I need to schedule a meeting. Tomorrow morning if possible. There's something important we need to discuss about Morrison Tech Solutions." "Of course. Is everything all right?" I thought about Margaret's warning, about Brandon's dismissive voice calling my life's work outdated, about Vanessa's casual cruelty in treating me like hired help. I thought about the company I'd built, the employees who depended on stable leadership, the legacy I'd intended to pass down to a son who'd proven himself worthy. "Everything's fine," I said, my voice steady for the first time in months. "I just think it's time I took a more active interest in my company's future again." After I hung up, I carefully returned Brandon's documents to exactly where I'd found them. I had dry cleaning to pick up, groceries to buy, a bathroom to deep clean. For now, I would continue playing the role my son had assigned me. But tomorrow, things were going to change in ways Brandon couldn't begin to imagine. I took the bus back to Wallingford with a clarity I hadn't felt since before Margaret's death. My small apartment with its second-hand furniture in view of the neighbor's fence suddenly felt less like exile and more like a strategic position. I'd built an empire once from nothing. Reclaiming it from my ungrateful son would be considerably easier. The law offices of Chen and Associates occupied the 14th floor of a steel and glass building on 4th Avenue, the kind of place where serious money changed hands quietly and professionally. I arrived 15 minutes early, dressed in the charcoal suit I'd worn to Margaret's funeral 3 years ago. It still fit, though the fabric hung a bit looser on my frame than it once had. The receptionist, a young woman named Amy who'd been with Richard's firm for years, smiled warmly when she saw me. "Mr. Morrison, it's wonderful to see you again. Mr. Chen is finishing up a call, but he'll be ready for you shortly. Can I get you some coffee?" "Thank you, Amy. Black, no sugar." I settled into one of the leather chairs in the waiting area, watching the rain streak down the windows. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Seattle in November was a study in gray, the kind of weather that matched my mood perfectly. My phone buzzed with a text from Vanessa. "Walter, we need you at the penthouse by 3. Brandon's suits need to go back to the dry cleaner. They didn't get the starch right." I typed back a single word, "Okay." Let them think I was still their compliant errand runner. Let them believe I had nothing better to do than manage their domestic inconveniences. Richard appeared in the doorway to his office, his dark hair showing more gray than I remembered. He was 48 now, sharp as ever, wearing a suit that spoke of success without being ostentatious. "Walter, come in. It's really good to see you." His office overlooked Elliott Bay, where ferries cut white trails through dark water. The space was lined with law books and framed degrees, but what caught my eye was a photograph on his desk of him and Marcus at a Mariners game, both grinning like kids. Richard had been Margaret's attorney first, handling her estate planning when the cancer diagnosis came. He'd become more than our lawyer over those difficult years. He'd become something close to family. "You look good, Walter. Better than the last time I saw you." Richard poured coffee from a carafe on his credenza. "Though I have to say, your call yesterday surprised me. You've been pretty quiet since we finalized everything after Margaret passed." I accepted the coffee and settled into the chair across from his desk. "I've been too quiet, Richard. That's part of the problem. Tell me what's going on." So I did. I told him about the gradual slide into servitude, how Brandon's suggestion that I help out occasionally had morphed into a full-time unpaid position as his domestic staff. I described the casual cruelty, the dismissive comments, the way Vanessa ordered me around like I was beneath her notice. Richard's expression grew darker with each detail. "Yesterday morning, I broke a coffee pot in their kitchen. Brandon spoke to me like I was an incompetent child. Then I found documents in his office. Succession planning materials, proposals to restructure the board, plans to phase out what he called legacy leadership influences. He's positioning himself to take control of Morrison Tech Solutions, and he assumes I'm too senile or too grateful for his attention to notice or care." Richard set down his coffee cup with deliberate care. "Walter, you do understand that he can't actually do any of that without your approval, right? The trust structure we established gives you complete control. Brandon has a salary and benefits as an executive, but he has zero ownership stake. You hold 75% of the company through the trust. The remaining 25% is distributed among key employees and the management team. Your son literally cannot make any of those changes without your signature." "I know. But he doesn't know that, does he?" "No. When we set up the structure, you specifically requested that the ownership details remain confidential. As far as anyone at Morrison Tech Solutions knows, including Brandon, the company is privately held by a trust, with details sealed for privacy. The board knows, of course, but they're bound by confidentiality agreements." Richard leaned back in his chair, studying me. "What are you thinking, Walter?" I looked out at the gray expanse of Elliott Bay, gathering my thoughts. Margaret warned me before she died. She said not to let Brandon take advantage of me, that I was too generous for my own good. I didn't listen. I was drowning in grief, and when Brandon suggested I simplify my life, move to a smaller place, let him handle the complicated business matters, it seemed reasonable. Caring, even. I thought he was trying to help his grieving father. And now? Now I realize he was positioning himself to inherit everything while contributing nothing. He treats me like hired help, Richard. His wife hands me grocery lists like I'm their personal assistant. They pay me nothing, and they've convinced themselves I should be grateful for the opportunity to serve them. My hands clenched around the coffee cup. Yesterday, during a call I overheard, Brandon said I'd built Morrison Tech Solutions on outdated principles. That it was time for modern leadership. Richard's jaw tightened. Outdated principles. The principles that built a company from nothing into a $50 million a year operation? Exactly. So here's what I'm thinking. I want to know my options. All of them. I built that company with my own hands, Richard. Margaret and I lived on nothing while I poured every cent back into growth. We delayed having children for years because we couldn't afford it. When Brandon finally came along, we'd already established ourselves, and maybe that was the problem. He never saw the struggle, only the success. He thinks it all just happened, that leadership is about confidence and charm rather than sacrifice and integrity. Richard pulled out a legal pad and began making notes. Let's start with the basics. Your trust structure gives you several options. First, you can simply reassert direct control. Show up at the office, remind everyone who actually owns the place, and put Brandon in his place. Second, you can restructure his employment, reduce his authority, or even terminate him if you want to go that route. Third, and this is the nuclear option, you could sell the company entirely and leave him with nothing. The third option hung in the air between us like smoke. Sell Morrison Tech Solutions? It's worth somewhere between 8 and 12 million in the current market. I have contacts with several acquisition firms that specialize in tech companies your size. With your reputation and the company's solid financials, you'd have buyers lined up within a week. Cash deals, clean transactions. You could walk away with enough money to live extremely comfortably for the rest of your life and then some. I thought about the garage where it all started, the cramped space that smelled of motor oil and ambition. I thought about the first client, a small manufacturing firm that took a chance on my custom inventory software. I thought about hiring my first employee, a brilliant young programmer named Sarah who'd believed in my vision. I thought about Margaret bringing sandwiches to the office at midnight when we were racing to meet a deadline, her faith in me never wavering. If I sold it, what would happen to the employees? That would depend on the buyer. Some acquisition firms keep existing staff and operations largely intact. Others restructure significantly. You could potentially negotiate employment protections as part of the sale terms, but there are no guarantees. I nodded slowly, processing this information. Morrison Tech Solutions employed 193 people. I knew this because I still received quarterly reports, though Brandon assumed I was too disengaged to read them. Those were real people with families, mortgages, dreams. Whatever I decided had to account for them. Tell me about option 1. Reasserting control. What would that look like practically? Richard flipped to a new page on his legal pad. You'd need to call a board meeting. As majority owner, you have that right at any time. At that meeting, you could make your presence and authority clear. You could restructure Brandon's role, limit his decision-making power, basically remind everyone that while you stepped back from daily operations, you never relinquished ownership or ultimate authority. And Brandon would be at this meeting? As VP of Operations, yes. He sits on the executive team, though not on the board itself. Richard paused. Walter, I have to ask. What outcome are you hoping for here? Do you want to salvage your relationship with your son, or are you past that point? The question struck deeper than I expected. I thought about the little boy who used to sit on my shoulders, the teenager who'd come to me for advice about college, the young man who'd cried at his mother's funeral. Where had that person gone? Or had he ever really existed? Had I been so blinded by love and grief that I'd missed seeing who my son actually was? I want him to understand consequences, I finally said. I want him to realize that treating people as beneath him, especially his own father, carries a price. Whether our relationship survives that lesson isn't really up to me, is it? He's the one who chose to treat me like his maid while planning to steal my company. Richard nodded, understanding in his eyes. Then let me propose a strategy. We do this in phases. First, I'll quietly reach out to my contacts in the acquisition world, get a sense of what Morrison Tech Solutions would actually fetch in a sale. That gives you leverage and options. Second, we schedule a board meeting for next week. That's enough time to prepare but not so much time that word leaks to Brandon. Third, at that meeting, you make your position clear. How Brandon responds will tell you everything you need to know about whether he's capable of change or if more drastic measures are necessary. And if he responds badly? Then you have the acquisition option ready to deploy. Sometimes the threat of losing everything is enough to create change. Other times, people need to actually lose it to learn the lesson. Richard's expression was sympathetic but firm. I've been doing this for 23 years, Walter. I've seen every kind of family business dispute you can imagine. The ones that end well are the ones where the person with the power is willing to use it. The ones that end badly are the ones where someone mistakes patience for weakness. I stood and walked to the window, watching the rain and the ferries in the gray expanse of water that had witnessed Seattle's transformation from logging town to tech hub. I'd been part of that transformation, building something real and lasting while the city grew around me. Brandon thought that legacy was his to claim simply because he was born into it. Set it up, I said, turning back to Richard. Reach out to your acquisition contacts. Schedule the board meeting for next Monday. And Richard, I want this kept absolutely confidential. No one at Morrison Tech Solutions knows I'm taking action until I'm ready to reveal it. Understood. I'll start making calls this afternoon. Richard stood and extended his hand. For what it's worth, Walter, Margaret would be proud of you for standing up for yourself. We shook hands, and I felt something shift inside me. The grief-stricken widower who'd let himself be diminished was disappearing, replaced by the man who'd built an empire through determination and principle. The man Margaret had fallen in love with all those years ago. I left Richard's office and took the elevator down to the street, where the November rain continued its steady assault on Seattle. My phone buzzed again. Vanessa, reminding me about the dry cleaning. I looked at the message for a long moment, then typed back, running late. You'll need to pick it up yourself today. Her response came within seconds. Seriously? We're paying you to help us, Walter. I stared at those words. Paying me. They'd never paid me a single cent. The delusion was complete. I pocketed my phone without responding and walked toward the bus stop, a small smile playing at the corners of my mouth. Let them wonder why their reliable errand runner was suddenly unreliable. Let them get a tiny taste of what life looked like when I wasn't there to smooth every inconvenience. The rain soaked through my suit jacket, but I didn't mind. For the first time in 3 years, I felt like myself again. Walter Morrison, founder and majority owner of Morrison Tech Solutions, was coming out of retirement. And my son had no idea what was about to hit him. Richard called 3 days later while I was walking around Green Lake, watching joggers and dogs and people living their uncomplicated Wednesday morning lives. The rain had finally cleared, leaving Seattle washed clean under a pale November sun. I'd been coming to this lake since the early days with Margaret, when we were too broke to afford real entertainment and a walk around the water counted as a date. Walter, I've had conversations with 3 different acquisition firms. The response has been even stronger than I anticipated. Richard's voice carried barely suppressed excitement. Morrison Tech Solutions has an excellent reputation in the industry. Your client retention rate is remarkable, your employee turnover is minimal, and your financials are rock solid. I'm looking at preliminary offers in the range of 10 to 14 million. I stopped walking, gripping my phone tighter. 14 million? That's the high end, contingent on due diligence, but yes. The market for well-established tech consulting firms is incredibly hot right now. Larger companies are buying up smaller operations to expand their service offerings. You built something valuable, Walter. The kind of valuable that people write substantial checks for. $14 million. More money than I'd ever imagined when I was writing code in that cramped garage, more money than seemed real. I thought about Brandon's succession planning documents, his schemes to phase out legacy leadership influences. He'd been planning to inherit an empire, and he'd treated the emperor like a servant while doing it. What about the employees? Did any of these firms discuss retention? 2 of the 3 specifically mentioned keeping existing staff. They're buying expertise and client relationships as much as technology. Wholesale terminations would damage the value of their acquisition. That said, there are no guarantees, Walter. Business is business. I resumed walking, processing this information. The third firm, the one that didn't mention employee retention, that would be the scorched earth option. Sell to them and Brandon would lose everything, but so would 193 people who'd done nothing wrong except work for a company owned by a man whose son was ungrateful. Keep all three options warm, I told Richard. I want maximum flexibility when we go into that board meeting. Already done. I've scheduled it for Monday at 9 in the morning. Location is the conference room at Morrison Tech Solutions. I'll be attending as your legal counsel. Marcus knows this is serious, but I haven't given him details. The rest of the board will be there as well. Marcus Chen, the CEO I'd handpicked 5 years ago when I'd decided to step back. He was brilliant, ethical, and had grown the company's revenue by 30% during his tenure. He'd also been walking a careful line with Brandon, trying to mentor my son while managing his more reckless impulses. I wondered how much Marcus suspected about Brandon's true character. Have you had any issues with Brandon this week? Richard asked. Any indication he suspects something's happening? I smiled despite myself. Brandon left me 4 increasingly angry voicemails yesterday about missing his dry cleaning appointment. Vanessa sent me a text calling me unreliable and suggesting I was getting too old to handle simple tasks. They have no idea I'm anything other than their disappointing errand runner. Perfect. Keep it that way until Monday. The element of surprise will be crucial. After we hung up, I completed my circuit around Green Lake and headed back to my apartment in Wallingford. The building was older, built in the 70s with practical efficiency rather than aesthetic appeal. My unit was on the 3rd floor, a 1-bedroom with a galley kitchen and a view of the parking lot. The furniture was second-hand, purchased from estate sales and thrift stores. Margaret would have hated it. She'd had an eye for beauty, for creating warmth and comfort in any space. This apartment was functional at best, depressing at worst. But it had served a purpose. When I'd moved here after her death, everyone had assumed I was downsizing due to financial necessity or practical simplicity. No one, especially not Brandon, had questioned why a man who'd built a successful company would live in such modest circumstances. The apartment had been camouflage, allowing me to fade into the background of my own life while I processed grief. Now it felt like a staging area for the counterattack. I spent the next 3 days preparing. I pulled out files I hadn't looked at in years, refreshing my memory on company operations, current clients, ongoing projects. I read through 5 years of quarterly reports, board meeting minutes, financial statements. I studied Brandon's proposals and presentations, seeing them now not as a proud father but as a business owner evaluating an executive's performance. What I found was troubling. Brandon's strategic recommendations consistently prioritized short-term profit over long-term sustainability. He proposed cutting training budgets, reducing employee benefits, and switching to cheaper overseas contractors for support services. His client acquisition strategy focused on high-pressure sales tactics rather than the relationship-building approach that had been Morrison Tech Solutions' hallmark for 3 decades. In one particularly revealing memo, Brandon had written, "We need to stop treating employees like family and start treating them like resources. Loyalty is expensive and inefficient. Modern companies understand that people are replaceable." I sat in my apartment reading those words, feeling something harden in my chest. This was the man I'd raised, the son Margaret and I had poured our love into. Somewhere along the way, we'd failed spectacularly. Or perhaps we'd succeeded too well in protecting him from struggle, and he'd grown up believing comfort and success were his birthright rather than the result of sacrifice and hard work. Saturday afternoon, my phone rang with Brandon's name on the screen. I considered ignoring it, then decided to answer. Better to know what he was thinking. "Dad, where the hell have you been?" His voice carried anger without any attempt to mask it. "Vanessa and I have been trying to reach you all week. We needed you Thursday for a dinner party, and you just disappeared. I had some personal matters to attend to." I kept my voice mild, almost apologetic. The mask I'd worn for 3 years slipped back into place easily. Personal matters? What personal matters could you possibly have? "Look, I need you at the penthouse tomorrow morning at 8. I have a breakfast meeting here with some investors, and Vanessa can't handle the setup alone. The casual assumption that I had nothing better to do than serve breakfast to his investors sparked something hot in my chest, but I maintained control. Actually, Brandon, I'm not available tomorrow. Silence on the other end, as if he couldn't process the concept of me being unavailable. What do you mean you're not available? Dad, this is important. These investors could be crucial for the company's next phase of growth. I'm sure you and Vanessa will manage just fine without me. This isn't like you. His tone shifted from anger to something that might have been concern if I didn't know better. Are you feeling okay? Maybe we should have you seen by a doctor. Vanessa's been saying you've seemed confused lately. There it was. The setup for declaring me incompetent if I ever challenged his plans. I'd been confused, unreliable, possibly senile. It would make a convenient narrative when he eventually moved to push me aside completely. I'm feeling clearer than I have in years, actually. I let a small edge creep into my voice. Enjoy your investor breakfast, Brandon. I'm sure it will be illuminating. I hung up before he could respond, silencing my phone immediately afterward. Let him stew in confusion. Let him wonder what had changed in his compliant, grief-addled father. Sunday, I did something I hadn't done since Margaret's funeral. I went shopping for a new suit. Not at the discount retailers where I'd been buying clothes for the past 3 years, but at the upscale menswear store in downtown Seattle where I used to shop when Margaret insisted I needed to look the part of a successful CEO. The salesman, an elegant man in his 50s named Thomas, recognized me immediately. Mr. Morrison, it's been far too long. What brings you in today? I have an important meeting tomorrow. I need to look like someone people should take seriously. Thomas smiled with professional warmth. Then we'll make sure you do. 2 hours later, I left with a charcoal gray suit that fit perfectly, a crisp white shirt, and a blue tie that Margaret would have loved. The total cost was more than my monthly rent, and I paid without hesitation. The man who'd been living like a pauper while sitting on millions in assets was gone. Walter Morrison was remembering who he actually was. That evening, I stood in my modest apartment wearing my new suit, looking at myself in the bathroom mirror. The man looking back was older than the one who'd built Morrison Tech Solutions, gray where he'd been dark, lined where he'd been smooth. But the eyes were the same. Sharp, determined, unwilling to accept defeat. I thought about Margaret, about her warning not to let Brandon take advantage of me. I'm sorry it took me so long, honey, I said to her photograph on my nightstand. But I'm finally keeping my promise. My phone buzzed with another text from Brandon. Dad, seriously, where are you? We need to talk about your recent behavior. It's concerning. I looked at the message for a long moment, then typed a response, see you at the office Monday morning. We can talk then. His reply came immediately, what? Why would you be at the office? I didn't respond. Let him spend Sunday night wondering. Let him lose sleep trying to figure out what his confused, unreliable father was planning. Tomorrow morning, he'd get all the answers he never wanted to hear. I laid out my new suit carefully, set my alarm for 6, and went to bed feeling something I hadn't experienced in 3 years. Not quite happiness, but something close. Anticipation mixed with righteous anger, purpose after years of drifting. Margaret had always said that revenge was a dish best served cold. Tomorrow morning, I was going to serve it ice cold in the conference room of the company I'd built with my own hands. The rain had returned by Sunday night, tapping against my window like nature's countdown to confrontation. I lay in bed listening to it, remembering another rainy night 35 years ago when I'd told Margaret I was going to quit my engineering job and start my own company. She'd been terrified and thrilled in equal measure, but she'd never doubted me. You'll build something amazing, she'd said. I know you will. I had built something amazing. And tomorrow, I was going to make damn sure it stayed mine. The alarm went off at 6, but I'd been awake for an hour already, watching the gray dawn break over Seattle. I showered carefully, shaved with precision, and dressed in my new suit with the attention to detail I used to bring to client presentations back when Morrison Tech Solutions was just me in a dream. The man in the mirror looked like someone who belonged in a boardroom, someone who commanded respect rather than begged for scraps of attention from ungrateful children. I arrived at the Morrison Tech Solutions building on South Lake Union at 7:30, a full 90 minutes before the scheduled board meeting. The receptionist, a woman named Paula who'd been with the company for 12 years, looked up from her desk and did a visible double take. "Mr. Morrison? Is that you?" She stood up, her face breaking into a genuine smile. "We haven't seen you here in forever. You look wonderful." "Thank you, Paula. It's good to be back." I signed the visitor log, noting the irony that I had to sign in to enter my own building. "Is the executive conference room available? I need to set some things up before a meeting." "Of course. Let me get you a key card. Your old one probably doesn't work anymore after all this time." She bustled around her desk, chatting as she programmed a temporary access card. "Everyone will be so excited to see you. We still talk about the old days, you know. The company picnics you and Mrs. Morrison used to host, the way you knew everyone's name and asked about their families." Her words landed with unexpected weight. I'd built Morrison Tech Solutions on the principle that employees weren't resources to be exploited but people to be valued. Brandon's memo calling loyalty expensive and inefficient suddenly felt even more obscene. "How are things under the current leadership, Paula? Be honest." She glanced toward the elevators, lowering her voice. "It's different now, Mr. Morrison. More corporate, if that makes sense. Mr. Brandon, he's very focused on numbers and efficiency. We don't have the picnics anymore, and a lot of the benefits got cut last year. Health insurance is still good, but they eliminated the education reimbursement program and reduced matching on retirement contributions." She handed me the key card. "People are grateful to have jobs, of course, but it's not the same family feeling we used to have." I thanked her and took the elevator to the third floor where the executive offices lived. The building had changed since I'd last been here regularly. The walls were painted in sterile grays instead of the warm earth tones Margaret had helped me choose. The artwork was generic corporate photography instead of pieces from local artists we'd commissioned. Everything felt colder, more expensive, and less human. The executive conference room was impressive in an intimidating way. A massive table dominated the space, surrounded by leather chairs that probably cost $1,000 each. One wall was entirely glass, overlooking Lake Union and the Seattle skyline. The other walls held large monitors for presentations and video conferences. This was where the future of Morrison Tech Solutions would be decided in approximately 90 minutes. I set my briefcase on the table and began unpacking. Financial statements, ownership documents, employee satisfaction surveys from both 5 years ago and last month that Richard had quietly obtained for me. Brandon's memos and proposals, including the damning one about treating employees as replaceable resources. I arranged everything in neat stacks, creating a paper trail of evidence that told two stories, the company I'd built versus the company my son wanted to create. At 8:15, Marcus Chen arrived. He was 52, Korean-American, with wire-rimmed glasses and the calm demeanor of someone who'd learned to navigate corporate politics without losing his integrity. When he saw me arranging documents at the head of the conference table, he stopped in the doorway, his expression shifting through surprise, confusion, and finally understanding. "Walter. Richard said you'd be here, but I didn't quite believe it until now." He set his own briefcase down and approached slowly. "It's really good to see you. You look like yourself again, if that makes sense." "It makes perfect sense. I haven't been myself for a while, Marcus. That's part of what we need to discuss this morning." I gestured to the chair beside me. "Have a seat. We have time before the others arrive." Marcus sat, studying the documents I'd arranged. His eyes lingered on Brandon's memos, and I saw his jaw tighten slightly. "How much do you know about current operations?" "Everything. I've been receiving quarterly reports the entire time, Marcus. I read every word, even when people thought I was too grief-stricken to care about business matters. I met his eyes directly. I know about Brandon's proposals. I know about the benefit cuts, the elimination of programs I considered essential to company culture. I know he's been positioning himself to take control, and I know you've been trying to moderate his worst impulses while maintaining your own position. Marcus let out a long breath. He's your son, Walter. That's made this incredibly difficult. Some of his ideas have merit from a pure profit perspective, but they go against everything Morrison Tech Solutions was built on. I've pushed back where I could, but he has influence with certain board members. And honestly, without you here, I wasn't sure if these changes were happening with your blessing. They absolutely were not. But that's my fault for disappearing into grief and letting people assume I'd checked out completely. I tapped the stack of financial statements. The company is profitable and stable, Marcus. We don't need Brandon's slash-and-burn approach to efficiency. We need to remember that our competitive advantage has always been quality service delivered by people who feel valued and invested in client success. I couldn't agree more. Marcus hesitated, then asked quietly, "What are you planning to do?" Before I could answer, voices echoed from the hallway. The board members were arriving. I recognized their voices: Patricia Kowalski from Operations, James Turner from Finance, and Dr. Sarah Okonkwo, who'd been my first employee 35 years ago and now served as Chief Technology Officer. Richard Chin arrived with them, looking sharp in his attorney armor. They filed into the conference room, each having the same reaction Marcus had displayed. Surprise, confusion, and varying degrees of delight at seeing me present and apparently engaged. Sarah actually teared up, crossing the room to hug me tightly. "Walter, I can't believe you're here. We've missed you so much." She pulled back, studying my face. "You look like you're ready for battle." "Because I am." I checked my watch. 8:45. Brandon should be arriving soon. Before he does, I need everyone to understand something. I requested this meeting, not as a courtesy or a formality, but as the majority owner of Morrison Tech Solutions exercising my rights under the company's trust structure. The room went very quiet. I saw understanding dawn on several faces. They'd known theoretically that I maintained ownership, but my long absence had allowed them to forget the practical implications. Richard has prepared documentation that I'll be distributing shortly. The short version is this: I've been reviewing company operations extensively over the past week. What I've found concerns me deeply. We're profitable, yes, but we're drifting away from the core values that made Morrison Tech Solutions successful in the first place. We're treating employees as expendable when we should be treating them as our greatest asset. We're chasing short-term gains at the expense of long-term sustainability. Patricia leaned forward, her expression intent. "Are you talking about returning to active leadership?" "I'm talking about reassessing our current leadership structure and determining whether it serves the company's best interests going forward." I met each person's eyes in turn. That includes evaluating my son's role and performance as Vice President of Operations. The elevator dinged in the distance, followed by approaching footsteps. I recognized Brandon's confident stride, the sound of expensive shoes on polished floors. He was talking on his phone, his voice carrying that particular tone of self-importance he'd perfected over the years. "I don't care what the client wants, Jennifer. Tell them we're implementing the new system on our timeline, not theirs. If they don't like it, they can take their business elsewhere." A pause. "No, I'm serious. We're not a custom shop anymore. They take what we offer or they leave." He appeared in the doorway, still focused on his phone, and walked several steps into the room before he looked up and saw me sitting at the head of the table. His face went through a remarkable transformation. Confusion, disbelief, annoyance, and finally a forced smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Dad? What are you doing here?" He laughed, but it sounded uncertain. "I thought you were joking about coming to the office." "Sit down, Brandon." I gestured to the empty chair at the far end of the table, the position farthest from me. A deliberate choice that wasn't lost on anyone in the room. Is this some kind of intervention? He looked around at the assembled board members, his smile fading. Because if this is about me asking Dad to help out around the house, I think that's a private family matter. This has nothing to do with your housekeeping arrangements, Richard said coolly, opening his briefcase. This is a properly convened board meeting of Morrison Tech Solutions. You're here as Vice President of Operations, and you'll conduct yourself accordingly. Brandon's face flushed. He wasn't accustomed to being spoken to like an employee rather than the heir apparent. He sat down slowly, his eyes never leaving mine. I could see the calculations happening behind his expression, trying to figure out what was happening and how to regain control of the situation. Let's begin. I stood, buttoning my suit jacket, feeling the weight of 35 years of experience settling onto my shoulders. Richard, please distribute the ownership documentation. Richard passed folders around the table, each containing the legal trust structure that governed Morrison Tech Solutions. I watched Brandon open his folder, saw his eyes scan the first page, then widen as the implications hit him. His head snapped up, staring at me with something between shock and fury. You own 75% of the company? His voice cracked slightly. That's not possible. You retired. You gave up control. I stepped back from daily operations. I never gave up ownership. I remained standing, looking down at my son. Did you actually think I'd built this company for 30 years just to hand it over to someone who hadn't earned it? I've worked here for 8 years. I've earned my position. Brandon's face was turning red, his voice rising. I've increased profitability, streamlined operations, modernized our approach. You've increased profitability by cutting benefits and demoralizing employees. I picked up one of his memos. You wrote that loyalty is expensive and inefficient, that we should treat people as replaceable resources instead of family. Do you stand by that assessment? The room was absolutely silent. Every board member was watching this confrontation with the intensity of witnesses to a car crash. Brandon looked around, realizing he had no allies here, no one who would defend his philosophy against the man who'd built the company on opposite principles. I stand by the need to be competitive in a modern marketplace, he said carefully. Sometimes that requires difficult decisions. Difficult decisions or cruel ones? I set down the memo. Here's a difficult decision, Brandon. As of this moment, you're suspended from your position as Vice President of Operations pending a full review of your performance and strategic recommendations. You'll retain your salary during this review period, but you no longer have decision-making authority over company operations. Brandon shot to his feet, his chair rolling backward. You can't do this. I'm your son. Which makes this harder, not easier. But yes, I can do this. I own this company. I built it. And I'm not going to stand by and watch you destroy everything your mother and I sacrificed to create. My voice remained calm, but everyone in the room could hear the steel underneath. You've treated me like your personal servant for months, Brandon. You've dismissed my life's work as outdated. You've planned to push me aside and restructure this company according to your vision of modern efficiency. Did you really think I wouldn't notice? Did you really think I was that far gone? His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. For perhaps the first time in his adult life, Brandon had no quick response, no charming deflection. He was simply a man realizing that his assumptions had been catastrophically wrong. This meeting is adjourned, I said, looking away from my son to address the board. We'll reconvene Thursday morning to discuss next steps for company leadership and strategic direction. Richard will send out formal notices. Thank you all for coming. The board members filed out quietly, each stopping to shake my hand or offer words of support. Sarah lingered longest, squeezing my shoulder with the familiarity of someone who'd known me since the beginning. Welcome back, Walter. We needed you. Marcus was the last to leave, pausing at the door to give me a significant look before departing with Richard. Brandon remained frozen at the far end of the conference table, staring at the ownership documents spread before him like evidence at a trial. The silence stretched between us, filled with 38 years of complicated history and 3 years of escalating disrespect. How long have you known? His voice was barely audible. Known what? That you were planning to push me aside? I heard enough over the past few months. I began gathering my papers, methodical and unhurried. But the real question is, how long have you seen me as nothing more than a burden to be managed? That's not fair. I was trying to help you after Mom died. You were falling apart. I was grieving. There's a difference. I looked up at him, this stranger wearing my son's face. You saw an opportunity in my grief, Brandon. A chance to position yourself as the caring son while slowly taking control of everything I'd built. When did the help turn into exploitation? When did you start thinking it was acceptable to treat me like your servant? He had the grace to look away. Vanessa thought having responsibilities would be good for you. Give you structure. Don't hide behind your wife. You made the choice to use me as unpaid labor while planning to steal my company. Those were your decisions. I closed my briefcase with a decisive snap. I gave you everything, Brandon. Your education, your wedding, your position here. I never asked for gratitude, but I did expect basic human decency. Instead, you called my principles outdated and my loyalty expensive. What do you want from me? The question came out raw, stripped of his usual confidence. An apology? Groveling? What would possibly be enough? I considered this, looking at the man I'd raised and wondering where things had gone so wrong. I want you to understand consequences. You treated your father like he was worthless, and now you're discovering he controls your entire professional future. You plan to inherit a company you never built, and now you're learning that inheritance isn't guaranteed. I picked up my briefcase and walked toward the door. The review process will take 2 weeks. What happens after that depends entirely on whether you're capable of real change or just better manipulation. And if I'm not? If you decide I'm not worth keeping? His voice carried an edge of desperation I'd never heard before. Then I sell the company and you lose everything. I said it simply, without anger or satisfaction. Richard has acquisition offers ready. $12 million from firms that would love to add Morrison Tech Solutions to their portfolios. I'd walk away wealthy beyond anything I need, and you'd walk away with nothing but the memory of how your arrogance cost you an empire. Brandon's face went pale. You wouldn't actually do that. Destroy everything you built just to punish me? I'd do it to prevent you from destroying it yourself. There's a difference. I paused at the doorway, looking back at him one final time. Your mother warned me before she died. She said I was too generous, that I needed to protect myself from being taken advantage of. I should have listened to her then. I'm listening to her now. I left him sitting alone in that expensive conference room, surrounded by evidence of his failures and schemes. The elevator ride down felt like shedding weight, each floor dropping away a layer of resentment and hurt I'd been carrying. Paula waved goodbye from reception, cheerful and oblivious to the family drama that had just unfolded upstairs. The Seattle morning was crisp and clear, the rain having washed everything clean overnight. I stood on the sidewalk outside Morrison Tech Solutions, looking up at the building that bore my name. For 3 years, I'd let grief convince me that this part of my life was over, that I was too old and too tired to matter anymore. My son had been happy to encourage that belief, to keep me diminished and dependent while he maneuvered for control. But Margaret had been right, as she usually was. I'd been too generous, and Brandon had mistaken that generosity for weakness. The mistake had cost him everything he'd assumed was his birthright. My phone buzzed with a text from Richard. Well done. Thursday's meeting will determine next steps. In the meantime, enjoy reclaiming your life. I smiled and pocketed the phone. Reclaiming my life. That's exactly what this was. Not revenge, though it certainly felt satisfying. Not even justice, though consequences were overdue. This was about remembering who Walter Morrison actually was before grief and loneliness had convinced him to accept crumbs from his own table. I walked to the coffee shop on the corner, the one I used to visit every morning before board meetings back when I ran the company day to day. The barista was new, young enough to be my granddaughter, but she smiled with genuine warmth when I ordered. "You look happy," she observed, preparing my coffee. "I am," I realized, surprised by the truth of it. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Back in my modest Wallingford apartment that afternoon, I sat in my second-hand chair with Margaret's photograph in my hands. The image was from our 20th anniversary, both of us laughing at something long forgotten, her eyes bright with love and mischief. "I kept my promise, sweetheart," I told her, my voice steady in the empty room. "It took me longer than it should have, but I finally stood up for myself. I think you'd be proud." The photograph offered no answers, but I didn't need them anymore. I knew what Margaret would say. She'd tell me I'd done the right thing, that protecting what we'd built together wasn't cruelty but necessary preservation. She'd remind me that loving someone didn't mean letting them destroy you. Thursday's meeting would determine whether Brandon was capable of change or if selling the company was the only option. Either way, I'd proven something important to myself. I wasn't a burden to be managed or a confused old man to be patronized. I was Walter Morrison, and I still had plenty of fight left in me. The late afternoon sun streamed through my apartment window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Outside, Seattle continued its eternal rhythm of rain and growth, technology and coffee, mountains and water. I'd been part of building this city's tech community, creating jobs and opportunities while maintaining the values that made success meaningful. Whatever happened next with Brandon and Morrison Tech Solutions, I'd already won the only victory that mattered. I'd reclaimed my dignity, my power, and my right to be treated with respect. The man who'd been breaking coffee pots in his son's kitchen was gone, replaced by the man who'd built an empire from nothing but determination and integrity. I raised my coffee cup in a solitary toast to Margaret's memory, to second chances, and to the satisfying weight of consequences finally catching up with people who'd forgotten that kindness wasn't weakness and generosity wasn't infinite. Brandon would learn this lesson one way or another. And I'd be there to watch him finally grow up, even if it destroyed everything he'd taken for granted. The phone buzzed again. Brandon's name appeared on the screen, followed by a message I'd been waiting 3 years to receive. "Dad, we need to talk. Please." I looked at those 3 words, feeling nothing but calm certainty. We would talk, eventually. But this time, it would be on my terms, in my time, with my rules. The servant had become the master again, and the lesson was just beginning. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.